Welcome to Lesson 3. Today we are going over an introduction to digestion, absorption, and metabolism. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that there's a lot of information contained in the videos that you're going to be watching after this introduction presentation, but don't get too freaked out about it. We're going to come back and revisit parts of that video as we go over each of the individual nutrients. So what you really need to be focusing on today is kind of the big picture of things, and then we're going to move and get into the deeper specifics as we move through and talk about each of the different nutrients. So mentioning the big picture, I thought it would be good to give you kind of an overview of what we're doing today, where we've been, where we're going, etc. So we've already talked about the food groups and foods on our plate, and today we are moving, if you want to follow the arrow on the slide, we are moving to the digestion of that food. So digestion is referring to the breaking down of that food. So once we start digesting the foods, then we start picking apart the individual nutrients that we'll be covering in future lessons, and we'll talk a little bit about in this introduction today as well. So we're going to be talking about the breaking down or digestion of the nutrients, and then we're going to be talking about the absorption of the nutrients. So that is how our body moves the nutrients from the digestive tract into our bloodstream so that they can then travel around and go to our body cells. And so you'll see our body cells are kind of represented here at the bottom. So once those nutrients get to our body cells, we have basically all the things that go on in our body cells is termed metabolism. And so we're going to have a little bit of an introduction to metabolism today. However, we're going to be focusing in on the energy metabolism and not all of metabolism. So as I said before, the term metabolism is actually referring to everything that goes on in the body. And we don't have time to go through that today or in this class. And so what we're focusing on today and in the class is going to be energy metabolism. And that is basically how our body makes energy, and that is going to come from the nutrients that are in our food, from specific nutrients in our food. Now, there's a few things you need to understand about metabolism. The first thing is that when we're talking about energy and usable energy, what we're typically talking about is a compound called ATP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. And you have a little representative illustration here of adenosine triphosphate. This is kind of my interpretation of it. So you see the big A for the adenosine, and then you see 3 phosphate groups. That's the little triangles with the phosphate on it. In between the phosphate groups, you'll see an illustration that PowerPoint calls the BAM illustration. So I thought it was very fitting. So you have some little BAMs between your phosphate groups here. That is representing the high energy bonds that are between those phosphate groups. And so what our body does is it takes our nutrients from our food. It goes through several cycles, and that's what you're going to be getting an overview of today. It will add a phosphate group on to this compound to make the ATP, and it captures energy in that bond when it forms. The ATP will then go out to a body cell that needs that energy. The phosphate bond will break and release the energy, and that's how we get energy to do all the things that our body has to do. So every time a muscle contracts, for example, we're using some ATP. So we're having little phosphate bonds breaking apart so that we have energy to use in the muscle contraction. Now, another thing that you need to know, you've already kind of been introduced to it, but not necessarily referred to in this way, is that when we measure energy, we measure it in calories. So you can also think of calories as the unit of measurement for energy. It's kind of like inches can be the unit of measurement for height. So when we talk about energy metabolism, we are also talking about calorie metabolism. That is actually another term that we can use. And we can talk about the calories that come in, or the energy that comes in from our food. And we can also talk about the calories that go out, or the energy that goes out that we're using every day. You may be wondering, well, which of our nutrients are actually giving us energy? So that is going to be our carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Those are what we consider our energy-yielding nutrients. Those are the ones that have the potential to be turned directly into ATP. Now, we do have classes of non-energy yielding nutrients. That's our vitamins, our minerals, and our water. You're going to run into some of our vitamins and minerals, and then you're also going to run into water in the metabolism video. And I think it's important to note that those non-energy yielding nutrients often help with the process of making ATP, but they don't serve as a compound that actually gets turned into ATP. So they're still considered non-energy yielding nutrients. When we talk about the energy that we get from the different nutrients, like I said, we measure in calories, and so a very important thing for you to know is how many calories per gram each of our nutrients have. So carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, proteins have 4 calories per gram, and fats or lipids have 9 calories per gram. Now, I do want to tell you this is kind of on average, so if you have one very specific carbohydrate, sometimes it's 3.4 instead of 4, but on average, all of our different carbohydrates are going to give us about 4 calories per gram. On average, our protein gives us about 4 calories per gram, and on average, our fat gives us about 9 calories per gram. You do also need to know these 6 major classes of nutrients. So those nutrients are kind of grouped together according to what they do, and this is how we're going to go through our lessons as well. We're going to go through each class. So we're going to have a lesson on carbohydrates, we're going to have a lesson on protein, a lesson on fats, a lesson on vitamins, minerals, and then we'll actually cover water in with the minerals. But you do need to know these 6 classes of nutrients. The last thing I kind of want to talk about, I already touched on the energy balance when you talk about calories in and calories out. I wanted to mention and kind of go over a little bit more about the calories out. So I wanted to go over another term for that. That's energy expenditure. So when we're talking about the energy that we use every day, that can be our energy expenditure. And I want to make the point that there are 3 components of our energy expenditure. So this is kind of how we divide up the energy that we use every day. The major component of our energy expenditure, so the one that makes up the most, another way to say that is the one that uses up the most calories or burns the most calories, is our basal metabolic rate. Our basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy or amount of calories that we need basically just to stay alive. So a lot of people don't think about using calories when you're just sitting, or even using calories while you sleep, but you actually use a large amount of calories even while you're sleeping just to stay alive. So if you think about, I was mentioning the muscle contractions earlier that use ATP. Our heart is a muscle, so every time it beats, every time it contracts, it uses ATP. Our diaphragm is a muscle, so every time it moves in order to let air into our lungs or out of our lungs, it's going to use some ATP. So we use ATP just to breathe and to pump blood and to make new compounds to replace old dead cells. And so we have a large component of energy expenditure just from our basal metabolic rate, just from living every day. Now, we also have a component of energy expenditure called physical activity, and this is going to refer to physical activity that we plan, which we also call exercise, but it also refers to physical activity that's just kind of simple daily activities like brushing our teeth or cooking. We're actually using additional calories on top of our basal metabolic rate anytime we do any sort of physical activity. The last component of our energy expenditure is referred to as the thermic effect of food. That's basically just the number of calories that we use to digest and absorb and transport our food, and to make our food into ATP. So you're going to actually see that in some of the videos today, where we're putting some ATP into the system in order to get some more ATP out. And that does take a part of our energy expenditure, and it is kind of counted into our daily energy expenditure, when we discuss how much calories we need per day or how much energy we need per day. So I think that's it for the overview for this lesson today. You're going to have a video about digestion and absorption, and then you're going to have another video about metabolism. They are each around 20 minutes, I think. So like I said, it's a lot of information, but we will come back and revisit the information in a lot more detail later on. So have fun and proceed through to lesson 3.